On Primetime Politics, clearing a major hurdle.
Bill C-5, our government's One Canadian Economy legislation, has just passed the House of Commons.
The Carney government gets its One Canadian Economy Act through the House of Commons on track to becoming law before Canada Day. But what about the concerns raised by Indigenous and environmental groups? The Ottawa Bureau Chiefs will weigh in on the political costs. And
this Prime Minister has a record of achievement in 100 days that would make anyone around the world blush.
What verdict are Canadians giving to the first few weeks of this new Carney government? Polls analysts Eric Grenier and Philippe Fournier on the latest numbers and the impact they will have on the government and opposition parties. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Prime Minister Mark Carney is celebrating a big win tonight, getting his signature One Canadian Economy bill passed in the House of Commons. This despite concern from environmentalists who worry regulations will be pushed aside in favor of development. Still, the Prime Minister says the legislation lays the groundwork for future Canadian prosperity.
The process to build in this country, which has become too arduous, has taken too long, and has been holding us back, is changing. In the past, with every year that a proposal to build a port, a wind energy farm, or a highway sat on an official's desk, we were leaving investment, prosperity, and jobs, people's careers on the table. We've been keeping ourselves dependent on foreign powers. But by building at home, we will truly make Canada strong. One strong, united and unified Canadian economy. Breaking down trade barriers, breaking down labour barriers to build that strong Canadian economy. That's what we're doing with the introduction of today's legislation.
Now, Indigenous groups were also concerned about the speed of the process and the lack of consultation before getting C-5 through the House. But the Prime Minister says Indigenous consultation does go part and parcel with this new bill. And beginning in late July, he says he will sit down for a full-day summit with First Nations leadership, to be followed by another summit with Inuit leadership and the Métis to follow soon after.
Being a reliable partner to Indigenous peoples is not just about upholding the duty to consult. It's about enabling the creation of long-term wealth and prosperity for Indigenous peoples through full equity ownership.
Indigenous participation is essential and an important part of the fastest-growing G7 country in the world. Ensuring that government moves forward includes upholding Indigenous peoples as part of it in their rightful place, by determining it for themselves.
Now, Conservatives did support the government in pushing through this legislation that aims to streamline the approval process for national projects. But as we heard from the Conservative House Leader earlier today, the party did get one key amendment made to the bill as it went through committee.
Did some great work at committee to make sure that the Liberal attempts to circumvent laws like the Conflict of Interest and the Lobbying Act were stopped. They tried to give themselves powers to avoid that. We've seen what Liberals do even with existing conflicts of interest. Lots of scandals where Liberals funneled money to insiders. So we did some great work at committee to build some protections around that.
Bottom line, though, C-5 gets the government fast-track, the bill that gets rid of internal trade barriers as well as fast-tracking national approval processes. It joins other bills like C-6 and C-7, both applying to federal spending, that got approved before the House rose, but some others not getting approval quite yet. That includes Bill C-2 on stronger borders and C-4 on affordability measures. Well, the controversy around Bill C-5 is the way the House ends this sitting as it goes into summer break. The bill will, by the by, head to the Senate next. And with that, happy to have on the program Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you.
Hey. Hi, Michael.
Yeah. So here you have Mark Carney, and as promised, he wanted to get this bill passed by Canada Day. It looks like it's on track to do so as it heads towards the Senate. But, not without a lot of controversy regarding consultation with Indigenous groups, concerns about environmental regulations. Is Mark Carney squandering political capital by pushing this through as quickly as he has, despite all these criticisms?
Well, I don't think he's going to lose a lot of critical political capital at this point. I think it's going to happen when you actually see the kind of infrastructure projects that are going to be approved. Some of them I think people will find they're going to be okay. Others they will find they're not. But what we're seeing here is that when it comes to major economic projects, that they can't rely on the Bloc Québécois and they can't rely on the NDP. And they are going to have to rely on the Conservatives. As long as it's in the country's national interest, from both of those parties' perspectives, the Conservatives and Liberals, Conservatives seem willing to support them. But their caveat is, that we saw with C-5, is they're not going to put up with the Liberals trying to sneak things through the back door. So they made some amendments to this legislation that would have exempted cabinet ministers, for example, from issues involving lobbying and conflict of interest. We don't need to get into that, but they are going to give them, in the final analysis, if it's in the country's interest, they'll support them initially, at least for now. But they're not having a blank slate here. They can't just do whatever they want. And one other thing is that C-5 wasn't as bad as other bills that we've seen this government put in, C2 and C4, that are very problematic and are going to have to be, the Conservatives or any party can support them. They're not going to even get through the Senate because they're badly drafted. And I think Mr. Carney needs to really think about, when he's doing legislation, not to allow everybody in government, and security agents in particular, to throw everything that they have always wanted into the mix in legislation, because it does affect the individual civil liberties of Canadians.
Well, and I will pick up on that, because yes, the C-5 does not necessarily deal with civil liberties, but it does deal with consultation, which is of course in the Constitution. It does deal with environmental regulations, which has been such a focus of the previous Liberal government, Tonda.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bob's right on the question of, does Mr. Carney lose or expend too much capital at this stage? That I think the real rubber hits the road when we get the list of projects. And I think in order to advance those projects, Mr. Carney will have to do more than delegate to people. He'll have to engage himself with Indigenous leaders and with, frankly, some of the minority party leaders as well, I think in a way that we haven't yet seen. But I agree that, some of the other legislation, in particular the border bill, which has all these other security provisions, there's a clear sort of line there that's been crossed. It became a kitchen sink bill. They threw in all kinds of things, an omnibus bill. And they would perhaps be better served by splitting some of these things, but they don't seem willing to. Same with the one economy bill. It's got both the nation building stuff and the trade barriers piece. They would have been able to expedite the internal trade barriers lifting if they'd split that bill too. Unwilling to do so. So I think what we're going to have to see is, we're probably going to see Mr. Carney put some water in his wine, actually, as the months come forward. The summer especially, I think he's going to have to engage on a very substantive level with Indigenous leaders on these nation-building projects.
Well, I will say, this honeymoon phase almost because of this honeymoon phase, the government's almost moving as if it's a majority government. But at the end of the day, it is a minority government, and as the honeymoon wears off, where do they make their compromise to get things passed? Joël-Denis, what do you say about, the political capital being spent on C-5?
I think he's not spending much on it, because I think he feels he's got a mandate to do that, and he's got the support of all premiers as well, which is an interesting thing, because I haven't seen the Premier criticize this bill. In fact, they are endorsing it quite forcefully. And I agree with Bob and Tonda on the following element. The very first project that will be announced by the government will be looked at through a microscope. Has the government done its homework on consulting First Nations? Has the government done the homework necessary to protect the environment? And is this project in the national interest, really? So this is going to be a critical one. So the very big announcement, I think, will be followed through. And one other element I want to say is that Mr. Carney, I think, is not being helped because he doesn't have his chief of staff on a permanent basis. Marc-André Blanchard will come later. There's also a new clerk from the Privy Council that will be coming into his job, Michael Sabia. And I think those people will advise, I think, in Mr. Carney to take the time necessary to consult people properly to avoid unnecessary friendly fire attacks on his agenda. So that's going to be critical. Summer months maybe, I think, will be helpful for the government to think through how they should proceed. If you want to go fast, they need to do things properly as well.
But, you know, Michael, we may not see as much controversy with the Tier 1 projects because some of these are already well in advance. I'll give you an example. The Kitimat natural gas, which there's going to be one LNG facility that's going to be going by the end of the month. They'd like to have a second LNG facility there. All the environmental stuff, the Indigenous, plus there's Indigenous buy-in of this, but all of this has been approved. That is a project that can be approved very quickly, providing the investors in the LNG project want to go ahead with it. And I think they probably will because it makes good sense, right? Yeah. Or there's a uranium project in northern Saskatchewan that has had provincial government approval, has all the environmental approval and Indigenous approval, but it's been delayed by Ottawa regulations. That can be approved quickly. So I think the Tier 1 ones will go quickly, but the Tier 2 or the Tier 3 ones is where you're going to run into problems because there has to be Indigenous consultation, and you need to have some kind of a proper environmental assessment because this can all get clogged up in the courts. Even if you want to move stuff quickly, if the courts start intervening in these projects, then you're going to be into a lot of problems.
It slows it down, ironically, as opposed to trying to speed it up. Listen, so, you know, as we watch all this kind of make its way Tier 1 and the projects beyond, I also want to talk about that, you know, Parliament's going to go on summer break now, so am I.
But not Mark Carney.
Not Carney. No, not Mark Carney, because he actually is now, and the government's going to be involved in this negotiation, this 30-day period triggered in Kananaskis with the United States to try to come up with some new trade and security deal. I'm kind of wondering what a win looks like, because, you know, under Kuzma, you had, what, about 98% of goods going across the border tariff-free. Does this deal have to be tariff-free to be a success for this Liberal government, or is there a level of percentage of tariff that would be acceptable and still be seen as a win for the government?
Well, that's a really good question. The Canadian government's position is it has to be tariff-free, and we are seeing the outlays of a possible deal. He's ticked off the 2% for the GDP for defense spending. We just saw him ticking off earlier this week on the aluminum and steel that we're going to stop anti-dumping, which I think is a big concern from the Americans who are worried about Chinese or Vietnamese or South Korean, Indian dumping steel into the market. But a problem we all have is nobody knows what Donald Trump's going to do. The U.S. Treasury Secretary had stayed the full 2 days of the G7, so they're trying to work out an agreement because I think he understands it's really important to have a deal with Canada. But who knows with Trump? It's impossible to figure out.
And going to Kananaskis, he says, you know, I see the logic or the love of a tariff, but what?
He said, I'm a tariff person.
That's what it was.
And he has said that consistently. That was my question. He says it. I asked it because he has been consistent, and no matter what any of his officials say behind closed doors, the decision is at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office in Trump's hands, and he has never wavered. And so you asked the question, what does success look like? Is there a world in which all of these tariffs get lifted? I think we saw from the Prime Minister on Thursday a clear signal that there may not be a world in which all tariffs are lifted. He's laying the ground for Canadians to understand there may be still at the end of whatever deal, if they come to one by the 21st of July, some tariffs in place, and then they will hope to negotiate further, perhaps in the context of a CUSMA review, a free trade deal review. But I don't still see where there's been any concrete signal that we're going to see all tariffs lifted. I think that Mr. Trump's made it really clear that's the foundational piece of his foreign policy, his economic policy, it's his revenue generator, it's also the way he wants to bring jobs back to the U.S. So I don't see it, and I think, I think we're getting ready for another scenario.
Yeah, I share Tonda's skepticism about the deal with you, Mr. Trump. Also because he concluded a so-called framework with Great Britain, and there still remains 10% at least minimum on most exportations from Great Britain. I expect that to be the baseline, the template for the deals with other countries, including Canada. Mr. Trump may say that he loves Canada, he wants to annex us, but he is not going to he's not going to make any gifts to Canada, not to Mr. Carney. And so what will be a deal for Canada? Trying to eliminate all the tariffs, I think it's mission impossible from Mr. Carney's perspective. That's why I think he did unveil a series of packages that could come into force on July 21st if negotiations fail, which I expect will be the case.
Yeah, well, although I will say this, if some form of tariff still exists, it basically tells Canadians you can't take your foot off the gas in terms of diversifying this economy, because if you were to remove it all, then we possibly could go back to where we were. So perhaps there is a positive for the overall Canadian economy in the long term if there is some form of tariff from the United States. But we'll see where that goes. Quickly, running out of time, I did have one more question, but I'm going to drop the question because I do want to make a statement. You three are a joy every week as we wrap up, because I said Parliament's going to rise for summer. We here at PrimeTime Politics will be back if anything big happens, but we're not back until Parliament gets back. But you three, I really adore you three. I adore the time with you guys.
It's
so thank you very much. It is our TGIF.
we all look forward to it.
Thank you.
We have fun.
Yeah, and that has nothing to do with the whiskey under the desk. Anyway, so I'm joking.
Nothing to do with the makeup room discussions.
No, that will never make it to air. Tonda, JD, thank you for today. Thank you, always. And to you, have a great summer. Well, as Parliament rises for its summer break, it's worth noting that when the fall sitting began, no one thought we'd be where we are today. Led by public opinion, Liberals were languishing in the polls. Justin Trudeau was trying to quell a caucus revolt. Pierre Poilievre was predicted to be the next Prime Minister, and Parliament got so tied up in a Conservative motion and partisan bickering, nothing was getting done. Here's a quick reminder now of what we've lived through in the last 10 months.
It's clear that they're willing to go to extreme lengths to cover up their corruption.
This is the Conservatives trying to muck up Parliament.
We got to stop the palace intrigue, and we got to focus on what's most important.
We think that the party needs to be refreshed, rebooted, new vision, maybe a little nudge to the center, and we need to move forward with a new leader.
I want to congratulate Donald on a decisive victory last night. I look forward to working with President Trump once again.
Well, Chrystia Freeland is refusing to go quietly into the night, resigning from her position as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister this morning, just hours before she was scheduled to deliver a fall economic statement.
James Maloney says that Cox is united behind the Prime Minister. Is that correct?
No. I think the only path forward for us is to choose a new leader and to present a new plan to Canadians with a different vision.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader.
I'm back home in Edmonton to declare my candidacy for leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada.
We don't need them to make our cars. We don't need them to give us lumber. What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state.
The next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, with 100.
I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th.
Is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government?
Take a look at what we're hearing from the Canadian press right now. They are at this moment in time declaring a Liberal government.
Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale. We're in the process of redefining our relationship with the United States.
Well, let's talk about where public opinion stands right now with both the leaders and the political parties. Polls analyst Eric Grenier is the founder and the writer of The Writ. Polls analyst Philippe Fournier is the founder and the writer of 338 Canada. Guys, I missed you. Thanks for joining me today.
Good evening, Michael.
Hello. So listen, I want to begin here with the Prime Minister. You know, slightly more than 100 days since he was first sworn in as Liberal leader and Prime Minister, slightly more than 50 days since winning the election. You know, you get the sense that Mr. Carney is still in the midst of a honeymoon right now, but I wonder what the polls are saying. Eric, I'll get you to start us off.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that Mark Carney is still in the midst of a honeymoon. His approval rating numbers that we've seen in polling that's been done over the last few weeks is among the best we've seen for a prime minister since the last time there was a new guy in the job. Justin Trudeau, just shortly after they won in 2015, had very high approval ratings. Seeing the same kind of thing for Mark Carney, so it does seem to be largely driven by that change of face, because we've seen for Abacus data, for example, showing that satisfaction with the government has gone from very poor to suddenly very good, the kind of numbers the Liberals haven't had for years. So I think a lot of it is because there's a new face in that Prime Minister's chair, and it's Mark Carney.
Okay, you know, I'm going to bring up a board here. I think this was Angus Reid. Take a look at where the approval ratings are right now for Mark Carney, because you'll see, as you say, fairly high, the highest since Trudeau, although, you know, both Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau both enjoyed honeymoons initially. Philippe, what would you say about this moment of approval for Mark Carney? Very much the honeymoon, but would you tie it to anything in particular?
Well, we could say that the change of moods that the electorate faced, around February and March has held throughout the election campaign, and it has held through the spring. Now, will it held through the summer? This is what we'll find out in a few weeks. But so far, it seems that Mr. Carney can do no wrong. His base really likes him. In the same poll, we saw among Bloc voters and NDP voters, I know there are fewer of them, but Mark Carney was at a plus 50 and plus 60 in favorability. This is astounding coming from voters of the opposition parties. So yes, a honeymoon for Mr. Carney. The question is, how long will it last?
Yeah, how long does it last? You know, we've had these little, I guess, markers, little victories that the Prime Minister can hold on to. You think about King Charles delivering the throne speech, a successful trip to Washington, a First Minister's meeting where he was praised, a drama-free G7 that just wrapped up in Kananaskis. I'm wondering, Eric, how has this helped build I guess the Mark Carney mystique or the reputation right now as he shows Canadians what a government in his name with a mandate is capable of doing?
I think why we're seeing that his numbers have been quite good since the election is that he is in many ways kind of delivering on what was expected from Canadians. Canadians saw Mark Carney as a bit of an antidote to both Pierre Poilievre but also Donald Trump, just that style of leadership that was a little bit more partisan, a little bit more abrasive, and in contrast to Justin Trudeau, less symbolic. And I think that's what we're seeing with Mark Carney, that it is much more of a focus, kind of business focus. You can call it that, as if it is running a Fortune 500 company. And I think that's, for the most part, what Canadians were expecting from Mark Carney. So far he has delivered on that. But again, a lot of it is things that are going to come in the future. Is there going to be a deal with the United States? Are there going to be counter tariffs? Is anything from the defense spending pledges actually going to pay any benefits for Canadians going forward? So it's what normally happens at the beginning of a mandate. You start putting down some easy victories, but it's about whether the Liberals are actually going to be able to start delivering on that. And if we do find in the coming months and years that they failed to deliver on that, then I think there is a serious risk that you have the same kind of rejection and blowback that the Trudeau Liberals had when the rhetoric didn't live up to the reality. For now, Mark Carney has some time to actually get some results, but he'll have to have some results, or this could just be a one-term government.
Yeah, which really explains, Philippe, why the Carney government has been so intent on getting Bill 5 past the House of Commons and passed on to the Senate, trying to get it passed by July the 1st.
Yes, and you have to beat the iron while it's hot. And while I'm not an expert on policy, I've read many critiques of C-5. This is the kind of bill that you try to pass when the electorate thinks you're walking on water. This would not work 2 or 3 years into a mandate. But to go back to the favorability numbers, it's not only the federal numbers nationwide that we were looking at. I'm looking at in Quebec plus 21 for Mr. Carney, and we just had a poll in Quebec that polled the favorability and appreciation levels of the provincial leaders. And strangely as it is, we can say that Mark Carney right now is the most popular politician in Quebec.
Yeah, interesting to note. Although when we talk about Mr. Carney doing so well in the polls, that obviously comes at the expense, federally at least, to the Conservatives and the Conservative leader. Eric, how are Canadians feeling about Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party right now?
Well, they don't see them as really a great option at the moment. We've had a few voting intentions polls that suggest the Conservative numbers have come down a bit. I wouldn't say we've had enough of those polls to really say if it's something real or not. But when you look at Pierre Poilievre's own personal numbers, there does seem to be a big problem there. Nanos Research came out with its latest iteration of the 4-week rolling poll that it does. And on the preferred prime minister question, Mark Carney was at 50%, which alone is a remarkable number, but Pierre Poilievre was at 24%. It was the lowest it has been since he became Conservative leader. So the fact that he lost an election, lost his seat, and now is kind of on the outside looking in, I think has really hurt his own personal numbers. More than I think the Conservative Party has been hurt by that. So I think that is something that he's going to have to work to fix over the next few months. Getting back in the House will, I think, be the first step towards that.
Yeah, and there is a by-election where he's going to try to get into the House fairly safe, a Conservative seat. I think the last time that the riding voted in the federal election was like 80% Conservative. So fairly fair seat for Pierre Poilievre to try to get back into the House of Commons. But, you know, I'm going to pick up on a point that Eric said there, Philippe, this idea that the party fares better in the polls than does the leader. Yeah. I guess that then leads some to question whether or not Pierre Poilievre serves as a drag on the Conservative Party right now.
Well, he sure serves as a repellent for voters of the opposition parties, that's for sure, and for the Liberals. The Big Ten coalition that Mr. Poilievre tried to build worked to some extent. They did get 41% of the vote in the election, which is the best result ever for this iteration of the Conservatives. But when the poll that Eric just mentioned, where we see Mr. Poilievre underwater in favorability, among Conservative voters, 90% still view him favorably. So for now, at least, the base of the Conservatives really continue to like Pierre Poilievre, and it will be fascinating to see the build-up to the convention, the Conservative convention, where Mr. Poilievre will be tested on a vote of confidence of his leadership.
Okay, you know, I have very little time, but I want to ask both of you, because I cheated before this interview. I listened to the two of you on the numbers. Great podcast, by the way. There, I'm plugging you guys. But, you know, you were talking about how the leadership race is scheduled for January, it looks like at this point, taking place in Calgary. What impact will the choice of the city and the timing of the year for this review actually have on Pierre Poilievre's ability to get favorable review numbers from the base, Eric?
I think that it is a choice that is the safest choice that they could have made. If you're trying to look for a place where you can get a lot of Conservative voters who like that kind of conservatism, like someone who's going to be a local MP, someone who's from Alberta, you go to Calgary. There's going to be a lot of friendly voices there at that convention for Pierre Poilievre. And the fact that it is at the end of January, meaning there are travel limitations based on, you know, if you want to be someone coming from Atlantic Canada or Quebec or Ontario trying to fly out to Calgary in the middle of the winter, maybe you might not want to try to take that trip. So I do think it is the safest kind of choice he could have made, which does suggest that maybe they weren't afraid that he would lose a membership vote, but they want to make sure that the number starts with a 9 and not with a 7 or an 8.
Mm-hmm. Philippe, last word to you.
Well, I would say I agree with Eric to some extent. There's also a very double-edged sword with this, because in Calgary, yes, there are many Conservatives in Alberta and in Calgary, but they expect winners. And I don't think it's going to be a walk in the park for Mr. Poilievre on that convention floor.
Okay, well, you know, CPAC's going to be there, so we'll be reporting, but that's months down the road. There's a summer vacation between now and then. So heading into the summer vacation, Eric Philippe, thank you very much for this.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, that is Primetime Politics for this weekend. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time.